Hi folks, thanks for joining me again for another session. I'm Jay Fitzhenry, Principal Consultant here at Visual. I look after our BizApps practice and do bits on the data and AI space. So today's session, we're expanding on what we've gone through previously, and we're going to be talking about rapidly building applications with primary focus on Power Apps and how they can help organizations. So our key sort of topics that we'll be going through is looking at the need for automation, some of the challenges, how we can expand that to our pro devs and where the pro devs come into this, looking at building solutions and looking at high value applications. Then we're going to be touching on governance and how to support this in a line of business scenario, and then looking at the website functionality that we get with Power Apps. So looking at Power Pages. So the need for automation. We've covered this on a previous session, and we identified these three areas that Visual really focuses on. Likewise, these are all Microsoft campaigns which are being pushed on at the moment. We've gone through the enable everyone to innovate at a high level already. Rapidly building apps is what we're going to be focused on today, and then there'll be another session at some point around automating business processes. So the key thing around rapidly building apps is those 3 points there. So reducing the app backlog. So looking at different applications across the organization, how we can enable people to build those out, where the pro devs come into, and actually starting that point on your journey. Looking at modern experiences, so doing away with paper-based processes and looking at how we can use modern applications to replace them and make them more efficient, and also reducing the total cost of ownership. So that in turn comes down to actually supporting platforms and supporting applications and so on. So the first bit we're looking at is accelerating app modernization. And what you can see here, so some of the points that you may already know, there's going to be so many more applications which are going to be built in the next 5 years, more than past 4 years combined. The thing with these, they're all going to be mobile, or a lot of them are going to be mobile focused. Pushing on from that, we've also got a number of clients who are struggling with unstructured data. And pushing on that further, we're looking at the technical talent that's missing from these organizations also. So if you're thinking you've got a lot of mobile applications which are going to be built, a number of those are going to be focused on things like unstructured data, might be looking at paper-based processes, whatever else. And actually a lot of organizations don't have the capacity to go and get that talent who specialize in things like app development. And the other push from that is many more applications are going to be built with low-code platforms, and the reasons for that, as you can see in this next point, is looking at there's limitations around that tech talent. So if we can have a low-code platform, it means we don't need to rely on pro developers as much. Surging digital demands. So this is looking at those three areas that we touched on last time, and those external factors which are going to force you to adapt to changes in the market and so on quicker. Security and compliance risks. So again, with a low-code platform, it's all good giving people the tools, but if they're not going to handle them correctly, if there are going to be issues with adoption, allowing IT to monitor those, we need something that's going to help us do that. And then when we look at things like ground-up software development, so if we're looking at traditional approaches of going out using maybe something like .NET or whatever else, actually, that'll not be viable for all cases. So going back to that point, there's going to be a load of new apps built in the next 5 years, more than the past 4 years combined. We're looking at low-code technologies. We're looking at potentially an increased number of citizen developers, which you can see with these stats here. So 70% of those apps are all going to be built in low-code by 2025. And if you look at some of the technology that can help you out with that, that's where the Power Platform comes into it. We're looking at more and more citizen developers. So we're thinking about people who are in the business, who are living and breathing processes daily, and starting to empower them to build their applications within the framework of IT. Less of a focus on those pro devs. Yeah, pro devs do have a point or do have a place, and then we'll touch on that in a little bit more detail momentarily. And then looking at the sort of market growth as well, it's expected that the spending on low code is going to increase as well. So again, you as an organization who are looking to innovate, who are looking to modernize applications, this isn't something to ignore, because at the end of the day, your competitors are doing this as well. So if you can get a platform that enables you to tick all those boxes, enables your workforce to identify those areas and look at those processes to automate, and using things like low code technologies, it's going to work out a lot better in the long run. And we'll go through some numbers around that momentarily. So this takes us back to this one platform, and you may have seen this before. Regardless of your starting point, there's always something out there. Whether that's you're looking at processes, whether you're looking at data storage, analytics. Key focus at this point is around Power Apps and the portal side, also called Pages now. But yeah, the key point is wherever you are on your journey, there's a starting point. And there's nothing really stopping you from taking that plunge, and that's hopefully something that you'll see later on. One of the other things I'll be touching on and creating in the near future is some of the demos around some of the apps that we've built, and then what you should see from there is actually the barrier to entry is it should be quite low. There's loads of templates out, and again I'll talk about that in a moment. So if we look at the impact of Power Platform adoption, and as you can see, it's all positive. So you're reducing the cost to actually build those applications, meaning that you can potentially deliver more apps sooner. When you look at the return on investment, your ROI, again, that's expected to increase. If you've got more apps, you're looking at making processes more efficient. Surely the knock-on effect is making sure that you're basically getting your money's worth and you're getting your money back. The next point is looking at that sort of 6 months. So if you look at your payback period on your original investment, you're looking around about 6 months. That 6 months is adopting the platform, building something like a centre of excellence, getting people skilled up, and to a point where you're innovating apps or innovating solutions quickly using the products that you get available within the Power Platform. And if we look at the final point, and this is a really key point for a lot of our clients, is that time saved. So by streamlining those processes with people in the organisation that live and breathe them, that can only be a win. So if we can save that time, not only can they spend more time on their day to day or on their day to day role, they can do more of those tasks within a shorter period of time, because again they're a lot faster, and the knock-on effect of that to an organisation is increased revenue, provide a better service, and so on. And we can look at some of the challenges around this. So if we look at the first one, so meeting pace demands in the current market, again, if we link this back to low code, and a lot of these areas, I'll only pick out a few of them because you can read them on the slide, but looking at those challenges, low code is designed to help out with them quickly. So with those current market demands, if you can quickly iterate through a solution, then you're going to be able to adapt to those a lot sooner. If you look at things like time and resource constraints, we touched on at the start around the talent required on a pro dev capacity. Actually, if you've already got the organization, you can enable them to develop. You don't need to go out for that those additional skills. You can nurture those within the organization. Look at things like governance and compliance standards. So again, all of these apps, if they're being built by the business and by the end users, actually, you're going to hit those standards pretty easily. Reporting and insight, again, we've got a lot of organizations we work for where they're looking at using things like Power BI to generate that insight and report on the information that they're working on, or the information that we get out of those applications. You've got lack of pro developer extensibility. Again, that can be a challenge. So this is when we start bridging the gap later on. We'll touch on that in more detail later. And then we've got the accessibility and being user friendly. So again, it's all good building applications, but how do we actually make sure they're accessible to our users? And again, there's things like accessibility checkers within Power, which we can touch on. So in terms of some of the common scenarios and patterns, so you've maybe got your web and mobile front ends that you're looking to build. There's extending systems to have new functionality. Maybe looking at some custom business processes. And one of the things we'll touch on in a moment is how we achieve these. So if we look at some of the patterns, you've got things like tracking and reporting across frontline and office. You've got logistics, system management, safety and environment auditing. Really, these are just a couple of examples of what you may be facing as an organisation. And this is where when we talk about rapidly building apps, we're talking about rapidly building apps with Power Apps and Power Pages as part of the Power Platform. You can kind of see your 4 areas here. So there's a massive focus around individuals in the business, so your citizen developers going away and building these apps. But that's not to say we can't use our pro devs, so we can look at extending that platform with our pro devs, with code, with developer tools, and we'll touch on that in the next section. We can look at developing solutions at scale, and one of the things we've touched on previously is around how IT can have governance and control over that, and again we'll talk about that in more detail. Then there's building solutions where we're working with modern high value applications. So this is how we can save money, we can have something that's scalable, we can connect it to the mission of the organization, we can solve sort of the biggest problems in an organization. And the final point there is building modern secure websites. So this is how we can take our data and make it publicly available, providing a tailored service to our clients. And quite a number of our clients have used kind of the website functionality we get with the Power Platform to do things like secure assessments, handling a knowledge base, looking at raising tickets, so customer service, and so on. So there's quite a number of purposes there, and we'll touch on some of those templates later on. So when it comes to extending your development across Procode and development tools, so in terms of some of the common pain points, so what you might find is there's gaps in that pro dev tooling. So you look at things like application lifecycle management, tool integration. Potentially there's some undefined roles in there as well. So it's difficult to know what people are doing, if people are duplicating their workload. Potentially you've got things like citizen developers creating additional overhead and so on. And then you have siloed SMEs. So maybe they work in different organizations, different business units. Either way, it's challenging to leverage those skills across the organization. So this is where you might start looking at things like a center of excellence. So one of the things that Visual can help you work on is building that center of excellence out. So that's identifying things like building a strategy team. So looking at what the low-code strategy is, identifying those key decision makers, who's responsible for doing what and when, the adoption that comes with that, what are the drivers for digital innovation, looking at different team members and how we can educate different makers. The second team is looking at our admin team. So how can we identify who's responsible for establishing an environment strategy? And one of the things that we look at, especially with Dynamics deployments, is we build all this sort of stuff out. We've got things like data loss prevention. So this is your different connectors, systems, how they're going to transfer data to one another. Look at things like capacity, licensing, and then finally sort of the admin governance and some of the best practices around that. So there's some checklists out there on the Microsoft Learn pages, which go through that in a lot more detail. And then finally, and I'd say arguably one of the most important, is the nurture team. So from a day-to-day, how can we get sort of champions to talk about the product, use the product, maybe running app in a day sessions, hackathons. And if you cast your mind back to the previous video that I did, we talked about that roadmap of delivery. So identifying what the use cases are, scaling up, running hackathons and so on. The nurture team is responsible for doing that. So that's making sure that the platform is used in a positive way. It's aligning to the kind of strategies lined up by those other teams. People are following best practice and they're using it for its intended purpose. So that's building applications to meet those business challenges. So one of the things we can touch on further is the Microsoft Cloud App Dev Platform. So there's a number of things here, and you can see low code is a relatively small part of it. You can see that in the top right there. there's many other components to it, and the thing is, when we talk about low code, it's all integrated. So again, it doesn't really matter what you're working on: VMs, containers, serverless, wherever, managed databases, all the way through to DevOps. It's all integrated. So if you need to manage like change control, packaging of code, and so on, again, all that can be done from the low code into that pro dev base. And one thing we'll touch on in a moment is what that developer support looks like and where that role sits. So one of the key things that Microsoft are pushing is around that world-class developer support. So there's multiple tools out there that we can use, and from those tools we can hook those into things like the Power Platform. If you want to use things like Visual Studio, accessing that code, there's some new features and releases that have come out in sort of the past year alone, which is building on top of that and filling that gap. Again, number of APIs there, supporting things like OData. So there's quite a few features out there which can help you. The other thing which we talked about previously was around custom components. So as organizations adopt the Power Platform, there may be a need where actually everything out of the box might not tick everything that's needed, and where your pro devs can come into it is actually touching on things like custom components. So the example on the screen here is a model driven app, so just a type of Power App, and actually we can come in here and build heat maps, look at things like sentiment, we can track that over time. And actually what your pro dev is doing there is using things like the languages they're familiar with to go off and build those components that are then reusable. So regardless of who you are, if you're a citizen developer, you can then make use of those pro dev components, build them up, and get them pushed into the environment. And that's where you get this idea of fusion teams. So this is where you're collaborating between those citizen developers and your developer teams to improve that collaboration. So you've got to leverage the knowledge and skills. So not only can those citizen developers give insight around processes, the business, and work through those first iterations of applications, your pro devs can come into there and say, right, actually, have you tried it in a slightly different way? Have we looked at maybe the ALM side, CI/CD? Maybe it's worth getting that, moving into GitHub. So there's quite a few things there in those 2 points. Carrying on from that, we have this idea of turning those experts into innovators. So rather than just having your expert that you go to go off and build the app, actually they can start setting, right, where are we going next as part of the platform? How can we innovate quickly, build components to enable those users to start adopting that platform? Likewise, they are the experts. So if we do need hands or we need to build something even quicker, that's where they come into it. Another key thing we're looking at, and especially we champion this at Visual with our V communities, is this enabling collaboration. So connecting people across an organization to come behind that common goal. And although low code may be slightly different from the business side, but it gives you an idea of how we can bring those low code developers and those code first developers together to fall into that same strategy, that same mission of building those apps out quickly and easily, even things like Canvas apps, so on, and also enabling those pro devs to transfer some of their expert knowledge onto those citizen developers. So this takes us quite nicely onto building those solutions where we're working with modern high-value apps. If we look at some of the common pain points here, we've got things like lack of integration and customization. So these are things where systems not speaking to one another, potentially bottlenecks. So maybe there are blockers on that roadmap to delivering that functionality. Could be due to siloed teams, as we talked about those SMEs earlier on, and actually the cost to develop can be relatively high. If you think about a bespoke project or bespoke solution, you can go through multiple rounds of gathering the requirements, going through actually building up the components themselves, building up the solutions, going through multiple rounds of testing, iterating, when that can take some time, especially if you're working with code, because then you've also got the reliance on pro devs and code first developers to build those out. And where the Power Platform builds onto this is how we can basically build those applications really quickly. So if we look at some of the components, again, you can look at Visual Studio and you can work through things with that. But again, there's out of the box components where we can just drag and drop bits and pieces onto a canvas and we're good to go. If you look at some of the connectors, 700 plus connectors which we can hook onto, So when we talk about APIs and limitations, there really it's not limited at all. That you can do really whatever you want. Adding on to that, you can build your own custom connectors. So one of the things that we do a fair chunk of, if we integrate with things like Logic Apps and we're building, on top of that, is we'll look at building custom connectors directly from Logic Apps. And there's well, I think it's in preview at the moment, but there's a new feature where actually you can go into your environment, go to connectors, and build a custom connector and directly connect to Logic Apps. So previously you'd have to export it and then import it as I can never remember the name of it now. But essentially there's multiple steps there. Now it's a case of clicking a button, you're good to go. So there's some bits there, and the whole idea around that is simplifying that building process. We've even got things like templates as well. So if you want to build an application and actually you're not quite sure where to start, and you just need that little nudge or that little bit of guidance, that's where there's a number of pre-built templates you can click onto and crack on with. Now that final point around working with things like Teams, PowerPoint, Excel, you can hook Power Apps into all those things. I see it slightly differently. So if you're familiar with using Teams, if you're familiar with using PowerPoint and familiar with using Excel, actually when it comes to building apps, all those skills are transferable. So if you think, you're listening to this as maybe not maybe you're not the person who would talk about IT strategy and so on, you're more of just, I'm in the business, I really want to build something. I've got this process which is taking forever to do, and actually if I can speed that up, it's going to make my life a lot easier. Maybe save you hours and hours of work. Actually, if you're familiar with using Excel, you can take that and go straight into building an app from it. If you know how to draw a picture, you can import that picture and it'll build an app for you off the back of it. Yeah, there's a bit of logic here and there, but actually it's that first step which is going to get you to a point where you can then innovate further. So then we push on from this and look at what does having deeply integrated apps mean. And the key thing is it's going to allow you to develop apps faster, so you can meet demand faster. Not necessarily internal, but if you think about external factors, if there's new standards that have come out, one of our clients, we're looking at ISO standards around providing secure assessments. They've used the Power Platform to build Power Pages, model-driven apps with Power Apps, and as a result, they've now been able to meet that demand. They are helping out with the ISO standard, and they're providing that service off the back of it. When we look at things like reducing cost, again, if you've got multiple applications at the moment, and actually, it'll cost you a load of money to extend that functionality, or actually the ongoing licensing fees are quite costly. Actually, by moving to a low-code platform and allowing people to develop on it, obviously with a framework of accountability, that's going to reduce your cost. When it comes to app management, again, there's loads of tools out of the box in the Power Platform that allow you to manage this. And one thing we can touch on is things like application insights. So that's something you already use. We can hook onto that to see usage. And then when we talk about integration, this is a really key thing. Really, we want to get to this ideal world where you've got one platform, everything seamlessly integrates. That we're not there yet. And a lot of organizations will have 20, 30, 40 plus different systems, which we need to pull all that data together. So actually, if we can effortlessly integrate with them, then that means that those integrations are going to be a lot slicker. It's going to be more efficient, and it's going to allow us to hit those first 3 points. So meeting that demand, reducing your cost, and the app management as well. So again, touching on that sort of streamlined app development, we can build apps quickly, one click, and we can get them deployed. We can automate tedious processes. So again, think about if you're there, you're working on processes now, and you think you can automate them. Building those apps quickly is going to allow you to quickly figure out if that's going to work, figure out how we're going to automate, and again, you can build on top of that. When we're looking at Fusion development, this is where we've got those pro devs. How can we leverage those pro devs? And we've touched on that. And there's also this point around decreasing the burden on IT. So if you think, rather than IT having to go away and make those changes, again, if you're in IT and you're listening to this, you guys are going to set the environment, you're going to set up policies, you can set up monitoring, and then that's it really. There's a bit of strategy here and there, but that's about it. And you're then going to enable your users to make use of that platform and develop their products. And then what you can see, if things are going to get out of hand or whatever else, you've got that monitoring, you've got those processes which should, one, either prevent that from happening, or two, give you visibility of what's going on and give you guidance on how you can tackle that. When we look at saving on development costs as well, so building on top of this, there's more features which Microsoft are adding in, such as things like the AI builder. Previously what you'd have to do is build out machine learning models, bring in like a data scientist, look at things like Python, R script, and so on. You can still do that, definitely. You can still build your own models out and expand on that. But actually, it's taking those things which are common, so things like predicting an outcome, processing a form, identifying an object, classifying text, looking at things like sentiment analysis. All of that is now being built directly into the platform. So again, if let's say you need some functionality and it's not there now, that is probably lined up for the next month. And if you go into things like the Microsoft Forms and the development roadmaps of products, you'll see that functionality. And the key thing is, the key method of this is enabling those users to be able to innovate. It's not enabling pro devs to build loads of fancy things. It's all about the business and those users and how they can make use of those tools. So you can imagine that the key focus here is making that easier. So if we can bring ML, machine learning, to those users to enable them to innovate faster, to give that functionality that's needed, that's obviously going to be a big win for the business, and that's the continued path of Microsoft with developing these products. So this next point is around developing solutions at scale, but also looking at the governance side. So to IT, if you're listening, this is where you need to jump in. So some of the common pain points, we've got things like guest policies and data sharing. How do we limit that? How do we balance that? How do we monitor that? You've got a decentralized app ecosystem. So if you've got a load of tech all over the place, and again, if you've got loads of apps all over the place, it can be difficult to manage, especially if you're looking at line of business applications, what's being used, what isn't being used. And then compliance management. So if you've got a lot of apps which are being built by those end users, sometimes they might not meet compliance and accessibility standards. So how do we manage that? So the first element around the control and app access compliance. So you've got things like different policies. You can block guest access or require multi-factor authentication. When it comes to things like centralizing the management of your apps, you can manage that in one place. You have your different environments there. There's a single admin experience, and there's tools in place looking at things like users, apps, usage, settings, which is going to reduce that risk of shadow IT. You've got this idea around empowering IT teams with the toolkit. So that's going to allow you to govern, manage, and monitor. You can drive usage of your apps in a scalable way. And also with things like the Power Platform Admin Center, you can look at how that data is secured, look at things like backups of environments and so on. And when it comes to your compliance needs, so if you look at Microsoft alone, they've got 90 compliance offerings. There's things like CIS benchmark, CSA star, self-assessment, SOC 1 type 2, PCI, and a few other ones in there as well. So that does meet the needs from Microsoft side in terms of things like accessibility and building on top of that. There's tools available in the platform that's going to enable those users to identify what's required and how they can achieve that. When we look at things like governance and compliance, so again, looking at identity management, you've got multi-factor authentication in there, so you can enhance identity protection and secure guest access. When we're looking at things like information protection, all that's built in, and you've got your usage analytics and audit logs. You've got things like data loss prevention policies and more. When we're looking at devices, we can look at how we secure control data on those using things like Intune. When we're looking at compliance, again, so 13 plus standards, so you've got FedRAMP, EU model clauses, SOC and GDPR in there built in. And again, with that admin experience, you've got things like those, the user management, app management, looking at usage, settings, and so on, and again, it's all in one place. So if you go to the Power Apps and Power Platform Admin Center, you'll see all this information. The final point I want to touch on really is around websites. So there's a functionality now in the Power Platform called Power Pages. It used to be called Power Portals, and Power Pages just makes that development experience a lot nicer. If we look at things like common pain points, so we're looking at integration customization. If you're building a website using a sort of classical method, you really need to think about what that integration looks like. And actually, with things like Power Platform now, we can seamlessly integrate, so you don't that part of the development you don't need to worry about as much. When we're looking at development bottlenecks, so again, those roadblocks which might turn up due to interdependencies, side teams, we've seen this before, and then high development costs. Again, multiple parts of a solution. The more parts you have, the more expensive it's going to be, especially with the integration. So if we can limit that, that's ideal. So with Power Pages, some of the things that we can look at, we can build these out using different templates, and we'll look at on the next slide. But also, once we build out those apps, some of the things we need to consider is things like telemetry, so who's accessing it and when they're accessing it. And the way we can do that is using things like application insights. So if you're familiar with this one, a pro dev capacity, a lot of that's going to be in Azure already. It's just a case of integrating that one extra app into it. And again, IT that's giving you that visibility of what's going on, especially with things like licensing those websites. If you can see who's accessing it, it's going to give you a really good idea as to what those costs are and like to predict those. If we look at things like real-time metrics and analytics, so we can then integrate things like Power BI, embed those components like reports, real-time dashboards directly into your website. So if you want to give people, maybe you look at customer service and you want to show them things like what their SLAs are, how many you've hit, missed, what you're doing to improve it. Again, you can take those reports directly, embed them. And we have things like sharing documents. So there's things like native support for SharePoint and Azure Blob, quite common these days. Multiple of the data sources if need be. So again, if you want to make things available to your users, we've got a client at the moment who are looking to push out things like software updates through a Power Page. Is natively available through things like document management. So there are a few options there. And then actually getting started, there's a lot of templates you can choose from. There's just a handful on the page there. You can either create your own template. You can build on top of that using code if needs be. You can use the drag and drop interface, or if you just want something that's click and go and you can just crack on with it, hook onto your data, and you're sorted. Again, that's available as well through the platform. So again, if we look at a few points here, we can look at things like security. So the number of scenarios we can look at. If you look at the back end, so it's all modeled via Dataverse or Dataverse database. You can securely authenticate with it, whether that's local authentication or if you want to use a different authentication provider. And then adding on to that, you can then have granular permissions in terms of what data individuals can access. If that's just their organizational data, personal data, specific tables, specific pages, you've got access for all of that. Looking at things like accessibility, so the number of accessibility standards, which are constantly checked as you're going through the website. If you look at some of the more advanced admin options, you can have IP address filters, logs, diagnostic logs. You've got things like web application firewall. So you've got added levels around traffic access control. So there's quite a number of components there. And adding on to that, and again, more important now more than ever, I'd say, is looking at multiple language support. So that's being able to dynamically translate the content on your websites based on maybe the different markets that you're going to and the different languages that you're trying to access and service. And again, if you're looking at accessibility, that's a key thing, especially if you're trying to communicate with a global presence, which quite a few of our clients are. Adding on to this still, and again, we've probably seen this page before around the number of connectors. There are many connectors and they're always growing, and you can build more on top of it. Yes, Power Pages has native integration with Dataverse, and that's where a lot of your data is going to come from, but actually we can expand on top of that. So if you want to integrate with MailChimp, you're doing marketing, Marketo, HubSpot, whatever, we can integrate all of those with Dataverse and then surface that data through Power Pages. Adding on to that, if we look at the wider Power Platform stack, you might look at things like Power Virtual Agents, have chatbots, add chatbots onto your website, and maybe extend onto that further by using things like Dynamics Omnichannel. How you can bring in channels from WhatsApp, Facebook, bring it through from a virtual agent, text message, whatever. There's quite a few options there for you. And then if we look at some of the kind of customer momentum around Power Apps, there's multiple different verticals here where we've got different organizations benefiting from Power Apps in slightly different ways, whether that's looking to increase revenue, make things more efficient, increasing the employee experience, in ensuring that applications meet certain standards. There's quite a number of different customers on here, and these are Microsoft customers, who are benefiting from this platform. And going back to the image that we looked at right at the start, some of them are only using Power Apps, some of these are Power Automate, and we'll talk about Power Automate in a separate session. But they're all benefiting from starting that journey, and they will continue to benefit from it by looking at the additional applications which are available to them. So again, with a nice summary, the Power Platform, it is a pretty amazing set of tools. There's a very low barrier to entry, and even if you are a pro dev and you are looking to make the most out of it, you want to look at code, building that out, that there's something for everyone. So whether that's you're looking at low code apps with Power Apps, which is what we've really talked about today, maybe you're looking at Power BI, looking at gaining insight, data security with data first, looking at building some logic out there with things like Power FX and building on top of that with Power Automate. Maybe looking at building some intelligence into there with the AI builder, or you're looking at bots with Power Virtual Agents. Everything's available, and you can chop and change and go between them wherever you want. Adding on to that, if you want to expand that functionality beyond just Power Platform, you can hook onto things like Azure, as you can see on the left. Looking at GitHub, maybe you want to look at LinkedIn integrations. You've got Dynamics builds on top of that. You've got Microsoft 365, all underpinned by identity, security management, and compliance. So if you look at your IT team, again, you can have visibility of all of this. Like I said, they're the starting point for everyone. There's no reason why you shouldn't be using this. And as I always say, a lot of organizations will already have this as part of their Microsoft 365 licensing with use rights. Might not be the whole suite, but again, you don't need the whole suite to get started. You only need one person who's looking to automate a process and make sure they've got the tools to do it. And from there, it's the rest is history. They can crack on and do that and enable the rest of the organization. So I hope you've enjoyed this session. Hoping to do some more of them. Looking at potentially doing Power Automate next, or maybe doing a demo of one of the apps that we've built. But any questions, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm sure I've got a link somewhere on the channel. Otherwise, comment on the video, like, whatever else. I'm more than happy to help however I can. Great. Well, thanks again for joining, and I will catch you all later.